HIPAA, my new patient is literally a saint. In August 1977, emergency personnel were dispatched to an undisclosed psychiatric institution for intellectually and developmentally impaired adults. Upon arrival, they discovered 4 deceased staff who appeared to have been picked into pieces. Small amounts of flesh, muscle, and parts such as eyelids, eyes, ears, fingers, and toes had been pinched away. At autopsy, it was determined that approximately 20%, 35% of the victim's body mass had been removed in this manner. Despite an extensive search, the missing body mass was never located. Residents of the institution appeared unaware of the deaths, only providing statements regarding Larry's guardian angel. Upon request, they led investigators to a 21-year-old man who introduced himself as Larry. Larry said he had no idea what happened at the institution except lots of fixing. Investigators soon uncovered evidence of systemic abuse against residents past and present, including multiple fatalities. The dead staff members appeared to be the worst perpetrators. Under the circumstances, the facility was shuttered. The residents were transferred out to other facilities. The murders remain unsolved. Approximately 6 months later, a similar incident occurred at the facility where Larry now lived. In fact, similar incidents have occurred at every facility in which has Larry lived for the past 48 years. Each facility experienced at least 2 freak accidents of staff who then had a substantial portion of body mass picked away. Between 1977 and 2025, over 150 such deaths occurred in facilities where Larry lived. In January 2025, Larry came to the attention of V-Class agent Gabriella W. Shortly thereafter, he was transferred to the custody of the Agency of Helping Hands. Larry is a 69-year-old Caucasian male, although he appears to be 20-25 years of age. He is 5'3" tall, with light blonde hair and brown eyes. His physical appearance is consistent with trisomy 21. Larry has mild to moderate intellectual disability. He possesses a sophisticated vocabulary and excellent manual dexterity. He has demonstrated the ability to carry out simple to moderately complex tasks. Larry carries a blue plastic toolbox everywhere. When he opens the toolbox, a variety of items can be seen, including needles, thread, hand tools, and large white feathers, as well as various body parts such as hair, eyes, ears, fingernails, and patches of skin. It should be noted that each item appears infused with a faint glow. When anyone else opens the toolbox, it appears empty. No one except Larry can remove anything from the toolbox. Larry can spontaneously heal physical injuries by using body parts within his toolbox as patches. Based on his interview, he also appears capable of reversing death by virtue of utilizing human biological matter. When asked who taught him this skill, he replied, "Nameless." Containment of the entity Nameless is now a high priority. Additionally, Larry senses psychological, mental, and emotional distress via a synesthesia response. He perceives negative emotional states as cracks, lines, crevices, and fissures in the skin of the person he is viewing. As Larry describes it, he can see when people are falling apart. Per evaluations, his synesthesia response does not differentiate between temporary or chronic distress. Larry can fix these afflictions on a temporary or semi-permanent basis by filling them. Larry uses various materials, but the best results come from use of his own hair. He told evaluators that, "My hair is the best tool I've got." Larry has been observed to braid, knot, and twist locks of his own hair before placing them inside a fissure. While no one but Larry can see these fissures, witnesses agree that the pieces of hair he uses disappear from view once he releases them. Larry's abilities bear similarities to inmate 24, Ward 1, Mrs. Stitcher. Unlike Mrs. Stitcher, he only applies his abilities to people he believes are, in his words, broken. Even then, he only provides aid to a specific subset of broken individuals. He will and has victimized so-called broken people that he views as victimizers in order to benefit broken people who are victims. While Larry's internal value system may render him functionally useless to many agency staff, he may be a valuable asset to the mental and emotional well-being of his fellow inmates. It should be noted that immediately following this interview, the inmate inflicted substantial injury upon Rachel B. That's me. A full account of the circumstances of her injury follow the interview. Interview subject: the patron saint of broken things. Classification string: cooperative, indestructible, under investigation, constant, low, dinos. Interviewer: Rachel B. and Christoph W. Interview date: 22 January 2025. People told my mom to get rid of me because I was born broken. That always hurt my feelings. My mom would tell me, "You're not broken, Larry, not a bit. You're a fixer. I was broken before you were born, but you fixed me. Don't listen to a word they say." But it was hard not to listen when they said things like, "Broken mother, broken son," and "He ruined your life," and "You're lucky we don't put you out in the street," and "Why don't you put him in an institution? That's where people like him belong." They always talked like I wasn't there. Maybe they didn't notice me, or maybe they just thought I was too stupid to understand. I wasn't too stupid, but I was broken. I was broken and slow and different. I couldn't go to school. Even when I got old, I couldn't read or write well, and no matter what she said, Mom was broken too. Her skin was always covered in big spidery lines like her old porcelain doll. When she was really sad or mad, the lines cracked open and bled shadows. No one else saw it. It took me a long time to figure that out because I'm not smart. The lines were real. They were a sickness, but it was a sickness only I could see. Sometimes the cracks went away when I was a good boy who did my chores and gave her big hugs and fixed things for her, but only sometimes. I was good at fixing things. I had lots of tools, plus needles and thread and buttons and fishing line and rope. Mom got me a toolbox to put it all in. I took it everywhere so I could fix whatever needed fixing. Mom always smiled when I fixed stuff. "You're a fixer, Larry. The best fixer, just like I always say." But she was wrong. I found lots of things I couldn't fix, like the bumblebee with no wings. I couldn't fix that bumblebee, so I put him in my grandma's old fish bowl and fed him sugar water and let him crawl all over my arms. I pretended he could talk in a teeny fuzzy voice. That's silly. But when Mom saw me being silly with my bumblebee, all the cracks in her skin got so small, they almost disappeared. Nobody but Mom liked me when I was silly. My cousin Rob hated me when I was silly. Actually, he hated me all the time. He punched me once right in the face and broke my front tooth. It fell out and landed on my bed. It hurt so bad. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how stupid I looked. How my smile looked broken. How I looked broken. My bumblebee crawled out of his fishbowl and onto my hand, like he was telling me everything would be okay. I could even hear him say it in his teeny, fuzzy voice. "Everything will be okay." Then he crawled onto my broken tooth. I picked it up so carefully so he wouldn't fall off, cupping him in my hand just like this. When he saw me, when I opened my hand again, my broken tooth was gone. And my bumblebee had wings. That's the first time a piece of me fixed a broken thing. I let my bumblebee fly out the window. He looked so happy. He remembered me. He even came back to visit before I got kicked out of that house. I miss him. We got kicked out because Grandma told Mom to send me to an institution for everyone's safety, she said, even though I never hit anyone or get out. We got out. Mom got so sad. The cracks in her skin got so big. I got sad too. Our new house was scary. The neighbors were mean and there was a horrible scratch under the floor at night. Sometimes I thought I heard a teeny fuzzy voice asking for help. But that wasn't real. Some of the things Mom said things weren't real either. Once she said, "I used to sing to you when we were both stars. We were so far away from each other in the dark, but you could still hear me. I used to dream of the day I'd be close enough to sing in your ear. Now that day is here, but I've forgotten how to sing." She said things that were real though. Mean things like, "You ruined my life," and "You really are broken, Larry. You broke me too. We're both broken now. That made me cry." Then she'd say, "Don't cry, Larry. I didn't mean it. I love you. You're a fixer. Don't listen to a word I say." But it was hard not to listen. It was hard not to see the lines in her skin turning into bigger, broken cracks. I thought about my bumblebee a lot, how one little tooth made his wings grow back. I wondered if knocking all my teeth out would fix my mom, only I was too scared to knock my teeth out. The only times her cracks got small was when we went to church. I love church. I love Jesus. The priest said Jesus was the great healer. Mom said healer is a fancy word for fixer. Just like you, Larry, you're a fixer too. At church, I would look up and see the gash in Jesus' side. I wanted to fix it for him like I fixed my bumblebee. Not because Jesus needed my help, but because I wanted to do something for him. Only I would never be good enough to do anything for Jesus. I couldn't even do anything for Mom. Except for at church, she got sadder and meaner. Her broken lines split open and bled darkness. I tried to fix her with pieces of me. I was too scared to knock out my teeth, so I used my hair instead. I used to put it on her cracked skin when I hugged her. Sometimes it made the cracks better for a little bit. I tried using my tools too. I tapped her gently with the hammer and put the wrench on her fingers. Sometimes. I buried my face in her hair. She buried her face in my hair. I told her I was fixing her. That made her laugh and say. When she laughed, the lines in her skin shrank again. But only for a little bit, so I started hugging her and wrapping her in blankets and making her tea and petting her hair like she pet mine when I was sick. It worked sometimes, but only for a little bit. No matter how many pieces of me I used, no matter how many things I fixed with the tools in my toolbox, no matter how many times I pet her hair or wrapped her in blankets or made her tea or hugged her, she got more and more broken. That meant I wasn't a fixer anymore. I was just broken, a broken fixer. That made her cry. "It's not your fault, Larry," she said, "though if it wasn't for you, I'd have fallen apart forever ago. You're a good fixer, the best fixer who ever lived. I'm just too broken to be fixed anymore." That night, she fell apart all the way. She went to a funeral home and I went to an institution with nothing but my toolbox. On my very first day, they took it away. That made me cry. They hit me for crying. That made me cry more. No one had ever hit me except my cousins. And not like this. These people hit me so hard I couldn't open my eye. They took me to a tiny room with bars on the window and locked me in. I cried and prayed to God for help. He didn't help me. Not that day or the next day. Not when I got hit again, or when they took my food away for crying too much. Not when the other patients pushed me, or when one single patient screamed so loud for so long the workers locked us all in our rooms without supper. I still prayed. One night I prayed until moon got so high it spilled light through the bars on my window. That's when I heard a funny sound. A noisy scratch from the vent, like a rat. I wasn't scared of rats. I used to feed them in my old house. They were my friends. I wanted more rat friends. So I got out of bed and crawled to the vent. Inside, I saw a face. It had no eyes, just big empty wet sockets. Its skin was all cracked apart just like my mom's. It started whispering without words, just babbling, like it forgot how to talk. That made me think of what my mom said about forgetting how to sing. Then it opened its mouth and I saw it had no tongue. That reminded me of my mom too. That's why I didn't move when it stretched its long, skinny fingers through the grate, or when it wrapped those fingers in my hair just like my mom used to. It tightened its hand like a trap and yanked my hair out and shoved it into its mouth. Then it whipped around and crawled away. I crawled back into bed, crying and missing my mom. I cried so loud, a worker came by and told me to shut up. I dreamed about my bumblebee. He flew out my window. I tried to follow, but I was too big to squeeze through the bars. When I gave up and turned around, I saw the scary face in the vent. I woke up crying. The worker told me to shut up again. That was Mr. Carl. He was mean, but not the meanest. The meanest was Mr. Paul. All the residents were scared of Mr. Paul. Some of the workers were nice, like Mrs. Mary. She brought me snacks sometimes and gave me medicine cream when Mr. Paul hit me so hard I bled. That happened a lot because Mr. Paul liked to hit us. Even though it was hard, I got used to living at the institution and I got to know all the other patients. I don't even know why some of them were there. Lots were normal and smart, not slow and strange like me, like Roger. Roger was handsome and funny, but they put him here for living with a man. Carrie was a genius and used to be a nurse. But they put her there just having a baby without being married. My mom had me without being married. And then there was Franklin. He sometimes talked to people who weren't there, but he talked to people who were there too, and he was a good teacher. He taught me how to read. "Why are you even here, Franklin?" I asked. "Because people want to forget me," he said. "They want to forget you too. This is where they send people they want to forget." That made me cry. I don't want to be forgotten. No one should get forgotten just for being different. And we were all different there. Some of the patients were so different, they couldn't talk or see or even move. Some of them didn't even know their names. I don't think the workers did either. But most of the patients were in between, people like Franklin and people who didn't know their names. Some used to have regular lives before they came to the institute. But lots and lots of them had been in the institution their whole lives. Some even got sent here when they were born. They never got held by their moms or made friends with bumblebees or learned to fix broken things. The only thing they had in common was they were all broken. They were full of lines and cracks that bled darkness. Some had cracks even bigger than my mom's, and no one was even trying to fix them. So even though I didn't want to be there, even though I was scared, even though Mr. Paul hit me, and even though I didn't always get to eat, and even though the pills the workers gave me made me sick, I decided it was time to be a fixer again. I didn't have my toolbox anymore, so I used hugs and hair pets. Sometimes I covered the residents up with the blankets in the day room and told them stories. I couldn't fix everyone, but I fixed a lot of people a little, and a few people a lot. Their names were William and Nedra and Edith and Eleanor. Eleanor was my favorite. She was going to have a baby right there in the institution. I thought that was wonderful, but the staff told her she was dirty and disgusting. It always made the lines in her skin get so big and dark. I told her, "Don't listen to a word they say. Your baby is wonderful and so are you. You're a good boy, Larry," she said. "I hope my baby is like you." No one had ever said anything so nice. It made me so warm and happy, I couldn't even sleep. I was still awake that night, smiling, when I heard a scratch in the vent. I sat up. It was the monster with his cracked skin and empty wet eye sockets and no tongue. Except he had a tongue now. "Look!" He stuck his tongue out. It was a funny tongue, long and flat, and the exact same gold color as my hair. "You did this. My tongue was broken, but you fixed it. I need more fixing." "No, I don't want to help you. You hurt me when I helped you before." He wrapped his long, rotten fingers around the grate. I bless you, but I'm broken. I need fixing. You're the fixer. Help me. If you help me, I'll make you strong enough to break out of here and break everyone who stands in your way. But only if you fix me." I wanted to get out of there. I wanted to be remembered, not forgotten. I wanted to go back home with Mom, but Mom was gone. I didn't have a home anymore. I just had the institution, and William, and Nedra, and Edith, and Eleanor. Oh. Besides, I wasn't a breaker. I was a fixer, and lots of people in that institution needed fixing. "No," I said. The monster screamed terrible names and shook the grate. He made so much noise that Mr. Paul came and hit me until I couldn't even lay on my back. When he was gone, I cried and wished for Miss Mary to come help me, but I knew she wouldn't. Miss Mary didn't work nights. The grate scraped open, and the monster crawled out. The monster scrawled out. I got scared, even more scared than of Mr. Paul. He was so much bigger than I thought, and he had wings. Big, broken, dirty wings that dragged on the ground. But instead of hurting me, he pet my hair like I used to pet Mom's. Up close, his skin was cracked all over and covered in sores. Then he pulled out a broken feather and put it on my back, right on top of the place Mr. Paul hit hardest. That was his favorite place to hit. Then the monster patted my head and crawled back into the vent. I reached around to get that dirty old feather off my back, but it was gone. The next time Mr. Paul hit me in that same spot, it didn't hurt. It didn't hurt the next time he hit me there either. It hurt when he hit me in other places, but not there. And that was good because that's the place he hit most. That scary old monster had helped me. You're always supposed to thank people who help you. So I waited for his scratch to come back, only it never did. I figured the monster was ashamed of yelling. Mom always felt ashamed after she yelled at me. After 3 nights with no scratch, I crawled to the grate and tapped it. Something banged deep down in the vent. A minute later, his scary smile blinked on. "Do you still need fixing?" I asked. He nodded. "Okay." I scratched at my hair with both hands. I didn't pull it because pulling hurt and I was tired of hurting until lots came falling out. Then I gathered it up and rolled it into a little fuzzy rope and poked it through the grate. The monster took it and put it inside one of his empty eye sockets. That made me feel pretty sick. It hurts when a tiny little eyelash gets into my eye. Seeing him put a whole bunch of hair inside made me shivery. But he didn't shiver. He just smiled bigger. Then he turned around and crawled away. I didn't see him again till after my next beating. They beat me for helping Eleanor. They were trying to take her away for shocks, and she was scared, so I tried to protect her. They beat me and took her anyway. They hurt me so bad I was scared I'd never be able to move again. When the moon rose, I heard a scratch the grate. Next thing I knew, the monster was leaning over me. His skin was still cracked and full of sores, and his broken wings were filthy. But he had a shiny new eye the color of my hair. He pulled a feather from his wing and put it on my biggest bruise. "Why can't you do that before they hit me?" I asked. "Because I can't fix what isn't broken." "You can talk?" "I can now." "Why couldn't you talk before?" "I forgot how until I met you." This made me frown. "Are you an angel?" "No, I'm just broken." "What's your name?" I don't remember." "How?" "I've been here too long. When you're in here, everyone forgets you, until you forget yourself too." He pulled out more feathers and put them on the sorest spots. "This won't last long because the feathers are broken, but it'll help for a little while." "Thank you," I said. After that, the monster came every night. Only, I stopped calling him a monster. People used to call me a monster. It's not nice. Since he didn't have a name and wouldn't let me pick one for him, I called him Nameless. The 10th time he visited, I scratched out more of my hair until I had enough to make a little twist. "For your other eye," I said. He smiled and stuck it right in. Seeing that whole big tuft in his socket made me sick, but it was still a nice thing to do. And I promised to always nice Nameless because he was broken and I was a fixer. He made it hard to be nice though. He was really mean sometimes and it was easy to make him mad. He never even told me why he was mad. That reminded me of my mom. And after those mean things, he'd say exactly what my mom said. "I'm sorry, don't listen to a word I say. You're not the broken one, I am." But less broken now, thanks to you. One night I told him about my toolbox, how it was a present from my mom, and how I used it to fix things everywhere I went. "Where is it? They stole it when I got here. They probably threw it away." That made Nameless cry. He usually got mad at me after he cried, but not that time. He always patched me up with his feathers. The feather patches only lasted a few days, just like he said, so I needed lots of them, and he needed lots of my hair. He used it to fix the cracks in his skin and the sores. He couldn't fix his wings though. "Hair won't work for wings," he said. "But will. Scary things." I liked seeing Nameless fixed, so I started pulling out my hair, even though it hurt. I gave him hair until I was almost bald. Some patients made fun of me, but most didn't. Soon I didn't have much hair left. That made me sad. Not about having no hair, but about not having enough to fix everyone. The cracks in her skin were so big I could see through her. I got so sad that Nameless noticed. "What's wrong?" I told him about Eleanor. "I don't have enough to fix her. I don't have enough to fix anyone but you. And I love you, Nameless. But you're not the only one here who needs fixing." "That's it? Why didn't you say so? I can help with that." Before I could say another word, he squirmed into the vent. He came back a little while later with a handful of hair. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "Does it matter? Make a clump and tie it with one of your own hairs," he said. "That's important. Just one strand, all the way around." "How do you know?" "Because I knew someone like you once. I don't remember her name, but I remember what she did, and that's what she did. So I tied the hair together like a fishing lure and used one of my hairs, just like Nameless said. Next time I saw Eleanor in the day room, I pretended to pet her, just like a cat, Eleanor, because you're so pretty and nice, just like my mom's cat, and dropped it inside the biggest, darkest crack. And it turned to liquid gold before it vanished. The crack got bigger for a second, but then it shrank down. "Larry, that was even better than a hug," Eleanor said. "Thank you." After that, Nameless brought me more hair. So much. More than I could use. And I finally figured out where he was getting it because all the staff members were going bald. "How do you do that?" I asked. "It hurt so bad when you pulled mine out." "And that's because I forgot how to be gentle," he answered. "You made me remember. Don't they see you?" "No." "How?" "Because they forgot I exist." This made no sense, but a lot of things Nameless said made no sense. Then again, he was locked up in the institute too. Most of us patients said things that made no sense. Why would he be any different? Besides, I had bigger problems. The staff decided their hair loss was because of fungus, and they blamed me because I lost my hair first. I got scrubbed with burning water and special soap that made my skin bleed. They called me filthy and disgusting and shaved all my hair off. Hair was the only tool I had. Without it, I couldn't fix anyone, not even Nameless. I was so scared Nameless would be mad, but all he said was, "That's all right. Who is your favorite patient here?" "You!" "I don't count. Who else? Eleanor, come with me." He made me crawl into the vent with him. It was tiny. I don't even know how Nameless fit. No wonder all his feathers were broken. The vent was crushing them. We crawled for a long time. Finally, he stopped at a grate. "You first," he said. "I'll just scare her. Tell her you need help." This time I was the one scratching. I pushed the grate open and crawled out. In the bed was Eleanor. "Larry," she said, "what's wrong?" I got so flustered I didn't even know what to say. Nameless came to my rescue. Eleanor's eyes got so big when she saw him. So big and scared. "The boy is special," said Nameless. "You know this, don't you? The embodiment of peace be with you." "I see wings, Larry," Eleanor said to me. "Does he have wings?" "Yes." She looked at me, then back at him. She was breathing hard. I was scared she'd scream, but she didn't. It took a long time, but Nameless talked her into sitting on his lap like a little girl. I don't know how he did it, maybe because he didn't look so scary anymore now that he had eyes. Then he brushed her hair with his fingers. He was gentle. He was so gentle she fell asleep. When he was done, he put her back in bed and covered her. Then he showed me his hands. Pieces of Eleanor's hair were laced across his fingers. It looked so pretty, like a net. "Bless them," he said. However you want." So I blessed the strands how I wanted and placed them right over Eleanor's heart. They shimmered like they were made of stars. Then they melted into her, filling in the breaks in her skin like molten silver. Every night after that, Nameless took me through the vents to the cell of a different patient. Most weren't scared, especially once they saw Nameless. They all thought he was an angel, even Franklin and Roger. Nameless held them like children and ran his hands through their hair so gently they fell asleep. At the end, he always had a lacy net of hair around his hands. I blessed it, then used half of it for Nameless because he needed so much fixing. I used the rest to help fix the patients. And it worked. The breaks in their skin got so small you couldn't even see them, and they mostly stayed gone. Sometimes the breaks came back, especially after a patient got hurt by Mr. Paul, or when they had to go see the doctors for shocks. But we always fixed them again. We fixed some of them so good they got to go home. Franklin and Nedra were two who got to go home again. That's what Mrs. Mary said. They got discharged to their families. Isn't that wonderful? It was wonderful even though I missed them. The only person we couldn't fix was Eleanor. The breaks in her skin never went away, no matter how much Nameless brushed her hair. He started calling her breaks crevasses. She turned into his favorite, just like she was mine. She reminded me of Mom. I don't know who she reminded Nameless of, but I think he loved her more than I did. We worked so hard to fill her in, but no matter what, she just kept breaking apart. One night she wasn't in her cell anymore. Nameless was angry. I was just sad. But Nameless made my life hard when he was angry. I didn't want him to be angry anymore, so I asked Mrs. Mary. Her family came for her, she said. Her and her new baby. This made me happy, even though it made me sad. I loved Eleanor so much, but Nameless didn't believe it. That's a lie. She's here. We're going to find her. That night, we searched all the cells. Then we searched the basement last. And that's where she was. In the basement, on a table, under a sheet, and all black and blue and dead. And she wasn't the only one. I saw Nedra and Franklin too, and one of the patients who couldn't talk, and two who had never lived anywhere but the institution their whole lives. They were all black and blue, with bloody faces. Franklin's face was so bloody I only recognized him because of his hair. That's when I knew no one ever went home. I was so stupid to believe that. Who would take us home? They sent us to the institution to forget us. No one ever came back for people they wanted to forget. Namos picked up Eleanor and rocked her. For once, he was sad and I was angry. I was so angry that I didn't want to fix anything. For the first time ever, I wanted to break everything. I tried, but I just got in trouble, the biggest trouble. Mr. Paul and Mr. Carl hurt me until I couldn't move. Until I felt dead. I wasn't scared though. Except for the hurting, it wasn't so bad. The moon coming through the bars was so beautiful. The bars didn't even look like bars. They looked like columns, wide and beautiful, in front of the door to heaven. The stars in the sky were singing, so soft and quiet, in teeny fuzzy voices. They made me smile. Then something screamed so loud the stars stopped. Nameless. Nameless. Trying to wake me up. But I was too hurt to wake up, and I was too tired. That didn't stop Nameless. He brought all kinds of things to me. He brought hair. So much hair. But so much more. He brought bloody teeth and eyes and pieces of meat. Only meat isn't supposed to have hair, and eyes aren't supposed to be outside your head. Eyes have tails, did you know that? I didn't know. That's creepy. I wonder if that's why eyelashes hurt when they get in your eyes, because they poke the tails. Nameless tried to put the hair and the skin and the taily eyes on me, just like I used to put hair on him, but it didn't work. I loved him so much for trying though. Looking at him made me feel happy, like when I looked at my mom. But keeping my eyes open hurt, so I closed them. Nameless screamed again. I was scared someone would come running and hurt me more, but no one did. I wondered if that was because I was dreaming, or maybe I was already dead. I didn't want to be dead because I was hurting, but I couldn't be dead if I was hurting. Heaven couldn't hurt, and Nameless wouldn't be crying if we were in heaven. No one is sad in heaven, especially not angels. And Nameless went away again. I know because it got quiet. The stars started to sing again in their teeny fuzzy voices. I smiled and flew away. I flew through the bars on the window that weren't bars anymore, but shining columns leading to heaven, and up into the sky with all the stars. They were singing in my mama's voice. I reached for the closest one, and then I slammed backward, screaming. I was back in bed, back in my cell, and Nameless was leaning over me with my old toolbox, and he had the big old needle I kept in there. He was sewing me shut with my old fishing line. Somehow he fixed me right up. I don't know how. I guess it was a miracle. Angels do miracles. No matter what he says, Nameless is an angel. When I sat up, all fixed and happy, Nameless hugged me. When we were done hugging, I used the rest of those pieces, including the eyes with the tails and the skin with all that hair on it and the ears and fingers, to fix Nameless up for good. That's what his wings needed. Body parts and blood and skin and eyes. When I was done fixing him, he wasn't skinny anymore. No bones sticking out of his skin, no bruises, and his wings were glory. That's the only word I could think of, glory. The toolbox was empty, so Nameless went to fill it up again. He brought back a big old set of keys with the full toolbox. Oh. Together, we unlocked all the doors and led all the patients into the day room. We fixed them all up. Nameless had to refill the toolbox at least 10 times. When everyone was fixed, we went down to the basement. To Eleanor. Together, we fixed her. It took everything in my toolbox, and Nameless still had to cut himself and put his own blood in her mouth. But in the end, she woke up too. We did the same for Franklin and Nedra and the patient who couldn't talk and the patients who had never lived anywhere but the institution. Everyone was so happy to see them back that Nameless pulled his feathers, his glorious new whole feathers, and gave one to each and every patient. And I knew, because the feathers were finally clean and whole, because Nameless wasn't broken anymore, that those feathers would protect them forever. When day shift came in, I thought they'd be happy to see us all fixed. Mrs. Mary especially. But they were all just scared. Mrs. Mary was the most scared. That made me sad. The police came because of the dead bodies. None of us got in trouble. They just moved us all to a different institution. It wasn't much better there. They took my toolbox. But Nameless came with me and he got it back the very first night. We got to fixing straight away. I can fix you too if you want. You can say no. Not everyone has to be fixed. It's okay to be broken. You're so broken you don't even have cracks anymore. You covered them up with scales. I can see the scales in you just like I can see the breaks in other people. They're old and really hard. They're growing everywhere. They're covering your eyes and your helping hands and your heart. They need to come off. They need to fall away. Let me have them. They'll fix so many broken things. It won't even hurt when they come off, I promise. He lied, it hurt. Like someone tore off the biggest, heaviest, deepest full body callus that had ever been, only they ripped it off the inside instead of the outside. And it's like the callus was hiding a massive abscess that exploded. Only instead of infection, the abscess was filled with emotion. And that was way worse. Through the pain haze, I saw Larry pouring handfuls of old, tarnished scales into his toolbox. They cascaded over chunks of flesh, fingers, ears, and sure enough, eyes curled atop their coiled optic nerves. They pulled me from the interview room, asking what was wrong. To my shock, I answered, "Nothing's wrong, everything's actually right, but it's horrible and I hate it." And it was true. Despite the crippling, raw agony firing across every internal surface, I felt free and right. I wish I could explain it properly, but there's really no way to explain that the world has returned to a state of rightness you have forgotten, or perhaps never even known, because of the invisible wildfire scorching both your physical and metaphysical insides to cinders. Anyway, the events that followed are too painful to relate due to being exquisitely embarrassing, but within about 3 minutes, I discovered that a side effect of this internal defense-destroying firestorm was an inability to lie. If someone asked a question, I not only answered honestly, but spilled out any related tangents, all of which were brutally honest and kind of shocking even to myself. They eventually took me to medical, who immediately threw up their hands and sent me over to research and development. Bless Christoph, he went with me. It wasn't terrible. They monitored me and ran a few tests. Their biggest concern seemed to be whether my own abilities were intact, which they were. If anything, my ability to compel speech was stronger than ever. Once they established that, they basically ignored me. Once it became clear that I was not going to die, Christoph instigated a game of truth or dare, only it was really just truth or truth, because all the dares consisted of, "I dare you to answer this question truthfully," and he would not stop. I have to admit, being compelled to speak the whole truth is the most mortifying thing I've ever experienced. I'm starting to hate myself on the other inmates' behalf. R&D released me once the pain subsided. Even then, I still could not lie. I couldn't even withhold information, especially if someone asked me a direct question. Christoph kept asking direct questions, all the way back to quarters, at my door, then asked, "Are you very sure you want to be all alone right now?" Unfortunately, the answer was no, but I shut my door before I had to endure his response. That turned out to be a mistake, because the second I turned around, the Harlequin crawled out from under my bed yet again. I recoiled. He looked less human than I've ever seen him. Not only monstrous, but otherworldly, like something from another plane entirely, wearing a poorly fitted skin suit. "I know what mind you're in," he said. "It's the mind you've always been in. You just covered it up with all the other minds. You want to be a helping hand, but not to me. I know that now. Not unless I make you. I will find a way to make you." And with that, he spidered back under the bed and vanished. I haven't seen him since. I wish he'd come back to explain himself, because now that the side effects from the Larry interview have died down, I feel normal and just as confused as ever. Don't get me wrong, I'm really scared. I'm terrified of whatever he's going to do to make me help. But I also kind of miss getting along with him. I guess I've been here too long. The time I broke into Disney, I recently read somebody's thread on here about breaking into river country at Disney. I've also done it, but I took the next step as well, swimming to Discovery Island and spending a night there. I was a senior in college, finishing up my photography major, when I began to hear hushed murmurs from my cohort about urbex, urban exploring. For those of you who don't know, urbex is when people illegally break into abandoned locations to go exploring, usually just for the hell of it. It's become increasingly popular with photographers, however, because many of the occupants and businesses in these decrepit buildings just up and leave, leaving all sorts of records and items behind. It's like a living snapshot from decades, if not centuries ago. As soon as you make your first cautious step into the building, it takes hold of you and transports you to the past. I gained enough confidence to go urbexing with a few friends, and it didn't take long for me to fall in love. I visited abandoned funeral homes that were shut down a century ago, where I marveled at how the place still smelled of the embalming fluids still stored there, safe in their glass jars. Aside from the layers of dust and debris, it looked and felt as if a funeral service would be held within the hour in the sanctuary. There was even an open casket near the pastor's podium, sitting there with its polished oak and fine velvet interior, still waiting to take someone to their final journey. I explored abandoned hospitals and mental institutions. There have been shows that try to illustrate what the insides of these look like, but they hardly compare to being there yourself. Each time you enter one of these abandoned buildings, it's like you're in the gold room from The Shining, and you seem to be locked in a time warp for the duration of your stay. For instance, when I explored S Mental Hospital in the middle of my state, I continually expected a neurotic psych patient to come shuffling around every corner, which had me sweating bullets and kept me on edge all night long. Places of despair and suffering are especially prone to the collection of energy. I am absolutely certain that there are patients within that building that still reside there, even though their bodily forms have long since decayed. But enough about that. Every urbexer in my home state of Florida knows about river country. Located within the Fort Wilderness campground on Walt Disney World property, it's actually really easy to break into if you know what you're doing and where you need to go. Don't ask me how to get in, I won't tell you. It's a thing for people of all ages to do, whether to experience the nostalgia of visiting the water park when it was open. I, for one, have pictures of me on the slides of river country and at the shows and exhibits of Discovery Island when they were both in business, or because they are so obsessed with Disney that visiting the decrepit water park has become a rite of passage. The brave souls who visit the abandoned water park know that if they get caught, they are permanently banned from Walt Disney World for life. But for some like me and my friend Joe, the cheap thrill of exploration outweighed the consequences of being banned from the biggest tourist trap in the eastern US. After our first and admittedly quick visit to river country one day before going drinking in downtown Disney, we decided that we wanted to swim the short distance between the park and Discovery Island. For those of you who don't know, Discovery Island was essentially a precursor to Animal Kingdom, functioning as a small zoo with a various assortment of animals. When River Country shut down and Animal Kingdom opened at around the same time, the animals from Discovery Island were moved to the theme park. Section of Animal Kingdom is still called Discovery Island to pay homage to the now abandoned island. Anyway, Joe and I started planning that day as to how to get over to the island. As I'm sure you've also heard, Disney has eyes everywhere. There are cameras and security guards everywhere you look, and thankfully, you can learn to spot them and their hiding places. Joe and I hunched over our liquor in the most crowded parts of the bars of Pleasure Island as we talked in hushed voices about how and what we were going to do to get over to Discovery Island. Looking back, I'm thankful we weren't caught and banned for life based on the conversation we had that night. When Joe and I went back to our hotel room after drinking, I quickly pulled out the laptop to do some research on the area around River Country, Discovery Island, and Bay Lake, which is the lake that the island sits in. The first thing I noticed is how much stuff there is online with regards to boat schedules and where security will be throughout Walt Disney World at any given time. Joe and I use these articles and forum posts to know when to avoid being around the island's shores basically all day, if you were wondering. We also used aerial maps to extrapolate how long we had to swim. While many Disney forums said it would be a grueling 100-foot swim, Joe and I realized that it would be a 100-yard swim in calm water after visiting Fort Wilderness and River Country for ourselves. Thankfully, Joe and I were both strong swimmers, so the excursion wouldn't be a problem for us. The two of us would set out shortly after dusk. We packed essentials like water, food, and some survival gear, just in case, into a couple waterproof bags that would act as our personal floating devices as we swam from River Country to Discovery Island. Then we left our car at the hotel and took one of the complimentary Disney shuttles to Fort Wilderness, where we spent the day acting like tourists, sitting on the beaches, playing in the pool, and visiting the animals at the campground's petting zoo. When dusk came and the security guards went home for the night, Joe and I made our way back into River Country, which was to be our launch point to the island and our returning point when we came back. We operated in pitch darkness, making as little noise as possible as we found the hole in the fence that let us go into the abandoned water park. As with almost every other abandoned location I've visited, River Country looked frozen in time with its inner tubes, water slides, offices, and pathways still intact. Joe and I took some time to explore the empty pools and water slides of the park before making our way to our launch point. The silence of the night was broken when we started hearing banjo music blaring from everywhere, which made me jump a mile. I've probably watched Deliverance too many times. Soon after the corny little banjo time came on, path lights began to illuminate a safe route to our launch point. Apparently, Disney is too cheap to stop running electricity and music to their abandoned properties. The swim to Discovery Island was about as easy as I expected it to be on that calm winter night. There were pages and pages of forums that warned of the alligators and brain-eating amoebas that populated Bay Lake, but I didn't heed their advice. Every native Floridian grows up swimming with alligators and diving in natural waterways with God knows what microbes, so swimming in Bay Lake would be no different. Joe and I made it to Discovery Island after about 30 minutes of slow swimming. We threw the waterproof bags on our backs and began our trek into the island where it would be harder to spot us. Within our first few minutes on the island, Joe and I got this feeling of being watched, like we were being stalked by some large predator. He chalked it up to adrenaline and called me a pussy as we found the first path to follow. My childhood memories of Discovery Island are ones that I'll always cherish. I got to spend a week camping with my family at Fort Wilderness, and we would often take the ferry over to the island to visit the tropical birds and see the collections of exotic animals. It was like a scene straight out of Jungle Book, with its sculpted plants and the din of exotic animals rustling and calling out from the lush trees above. The quaint little island still holds this charm, although the exotic plants have overgrown and taken over the island, giving it a more wild appearance. The path we chose led up to a series of cages and small fences. It was obvious that during its glory days, this area housed a number of exotic birds that were free to roam around as they pleased. The cages were probably used to house small mammals or large birds of some sort. Joe and I walked around the area, noting how the shallow ponds and sculpted waterfalls still retained their beauty. We then went to inspect the cages, which still had their exhibit signs on them. There was a large array of South American and African birds that once lived there, with the occasional mammal, but now all the cages were empty. I was inspecting a cage that once housed toucans when I heard some shuffling nearby. Joe, what was that?" I asked, looking around to spot the danger. Joe pulled a knife from his pocket and brandished it in the direction of the noise. He threatened to knife whatever came out of the bushes until he saw what it was. A tortoise, a giant fucking tortoise, like one of the ones from the Galapagos. "Look, he must be a stowaway," I exclaimed, walking over to squat down in front of the large reptile. It hissed at me and raised its head in defense, as we were probably the first humans he had seen. I bet his parents laid eggs that the staff didn't know about. There were probably a few of these guys scooting around the island, I bet. There's certainly enough vegetation for them to eat. I patted the tortoise's shell as Joe made his way over to do the same. "See, this island's not so bad, huh?" he asked as he pet our new friend. His toothy grin reeked of the confidence and fearlessness that I lacked. Joe and I spent a few more moments with the tortoise before we moved on to explore more of the island. We found more exhibits and paths that led around this way and that. We couldn't help but take our time to explore each exhibit area and read every sign, spending an uneventful night nestled in the thick foliage of Discovery Island. Daytime was different though. We had agreed to wait until dawn to start exploring the buildings that were still on the property, the majority of which we had found during our nighttime scouting. First was the gift shop, located just inside the main dock where the ferry used to pull in. The cheery images of Mickey, Minnie, Goofy, and Donald in safari gear still looked new, even if the colors were slightly faded. There was still merchandise on the shelves as well, and Joe managed to stuff a commemorative magnet into his pocket while I looked at all the stuffed animals and t-shirts. I, for one, wasn't keen on stealing. Once we were finished checking out the gift shop, we went to go explore the husbandry buildings and indoor animal houses. These buildings were still all pitch black, save for the small areas of light that shone through windows, looking much like Mulder and Scully. As we found the center of a large exhibit hall, Joe and I pulled out our flashlights and quickly realized that we weren't alone. There were dozens of pairs of eyes reflecting the light back at us. Joe and I froze in our tracks as we saw a colony of monkeys looking back at us. They were larger and far more muscular than any monkey I've ever seen before, probably a cross between multiple species that used to be on display. One of them yawned and showed off its fangs that were easily the size of my middle finger. We knew we had to leave, now. "More leftovers," Joe murmured to me as we began shuffling backwards towards the door. We didn't lose focus on the group of primates who were beginning to congregate. My friend's heel caught on something as we moved, and he fell backwards, hitting his head on the cold concrete below with a loud smack, where he became unconscious. The colony of monkeys noticed Joe's fall as well. Acting like one large animal, they all banded together and moved in sync towards the still body of my friend, whooping and hollering at the tops of their lungs. Their screams sounded human-like as they approached, some of them standing on two legs as they did so. The larger monkeys had to be at least 4 feet tall on their hind legs, looking almost human-like with patches of shaggy brown hair on their heads and coarse, short hair on their bodies. With about 20 of them now approaching Joe and I with a predatory stare, I knew that I was going to be no match fighting them off. I slowly backed up 25 yards or so, away from my unconscious friend before the colony of monkeys made their descent. What happened then is something I'll never forget. The monkeys, who now surrounded my friend, began to eat him alive. Joe's screams of anguish were deafened by the screams of the monkeys, who were now excited and enraged. They took large, bloody bites out of my friend, ripping him apart like a child's doll. Joe had a slow death, slower than I would have imagined from being ripped open, but I can only assume he was in a state of shock as the monkeys began to violently tear his intestines and other organs out of his body cavity and drag them off into their own corners of the room to eat. Occasionally, 2 monkeys would squabble over a clearly distinguishable body part, and I would often hear the loud crack of his bones being broken from their strong jaws and large teeth. I waited until each last monkey was occupied with eating before I made my escape out of the building and to the edge of the island. Thankfully, none of them pursued me as I made my leave, beelining it to the opposite side of the island. My best friend was gone. It was his idea to go to this stupid island. He called me a pussy for being so afraid. I guess I was right after all to have my wits about me, because he was now in a dozen pieces being ravenously devoured by some strange mutant primates that Disney doesn't want their guests to know about. I bet there are more animals on that island, ones that have evolved and mutated to become monstrous and aggressive beyond belief. I didn't stick around to find out, I can tell you that for sure. Being banned by some stupid park was far safer than being stuck on an island with God knows what wants to eat me now. I don't even remember the swim back to river country, except for the fact that I made it back to the main Fort Wilderness campground, safe and sound, and without getting caught. Upon returning home and taking a week of personal time to recover, I went to a local urbex meetup to tell people what had happened to my friend Joe. I was expecting surprised reactions from all of the urbexers, but instead I was met with understanding and sympathy. Apparently, many people go out to Discovery Island. It's a thing, just like breaking into river country is. However, most people don't make it back from the island alive, and the ones that do share their stories of predatory animals of all shapes and sizes. Some who survive their visit to Discovery Island say that Disney has a child trafficking ring, and the children who don't survive are brought to the island so no evidence can be found. Others say that black magic and human sacrifices are performed there to keep Disney's profits up. Walt Disney himself knew a lot about occultism. As the stories go, it doesn't matter to me which rumor about Discovery Island you believe or why you would even want to go urbexing on Disney property. If you are wise, you'll heed my advice and never swim out to that goddamned island. If you do, prepare yourself for the horrors that abound in the one place that lifts the innocent veil of the happiest place I work at Disney. On Earth. Stay away from the Haunted Mansion. I guess it's probably best if I start from the very beginning. My name, though not important, is Joey. Last year, I was lucky enough to be able to get into the Disney College program. If you aren't familiar, that's when you basically get credits for working at Disney World. When I found out I was invited to the program, I was ecstatic. Even though I would leave all of my friends, I figured it was for the best. Admittedly, I had been partying a little too often lately and pushing off my schoolwork, so this could have been a good opportunity for me. After a very extensive going-away party, I was on a plane flying cross-country to my new home, well, for the next 6 months at least. I was assigned to a bunk room of sorts, and given my job, I was to work on the Haunted Mansion ride in Magic Kingdom. This was pretty exciting news to me. I've always loved spooky paranormal things. I know this ride was geared towards children, but even still, I got my hours and was ready to start. The first couple of weeks were kind of slow, being as it was my first time doing the program. You don't get to go in the busy summer season. However, it was Disney World, so obviously it was still a fairly busy place. I was getting pretty close with some of my coworkers. Eli, Mika, and Emily especially. We hung out almost every day before and after work. And if we were lucky enough to have the same days off, we would spend them together. Eli and Mika shortly after started dating, leaving Emily and I alone together a lot. Once two people become official, it tends to pry them away from friends. One night, the four of us had work together. Em and I finally got them to hang out with us after our shifts. We were going to play some cards and have a few drinks. The shift went by with little to no trouble. A few guests complaining some of the ghosts at the last dinner party scene were too scary for the kids. We politely had to apologize. You find yourself saying sorry a lot in this job. They all kept complaining about the lady crying in the bloody dress by the fireplace. That stuck me as odd. I have been on the ride and walked the ride countless times. Never did I see said women. I brushed it off. The shift ended with throbbing feet. It's funny, I'm not an athlete by any means, but I was not lazy at all. I would skateboard every day, hike all the time, play sports whenever I had the chance, but my feet still hurt from walking on that moving walkway for 8-12 hours a day. I showered and went back to my room. My friends were waiting for me. Eli was watching TV, I remember it clear as day. The Bruins were playing the Avalanche. Him being from Colorado and me being from just outside Boston, we had some choice words for each other. The girls had their girl talk while we kept drinking and yelling at each other. When the game was over, we were all good and drunk, so the cards were never even opened. We did what drunk kids do. We talked. It wasn't long before someone brought up the weird complaints made today. I wanted to bring it up myself, but Mika did first. Eli, being the one who worked there the longest, suddenly became very serious. "Let's not even get into that. Just forget it," he said. His tone seemed stern. It made no sense because he was so laid back. What's your problem? Mika asked him. She also saw the change in his demeanor. It's just once you know, you can't go back, he said, looking down, shaking his head. I still wish I didn't know. Guys, let's just leave it alone, I suggested, totally planning on making him tell me when we were alone. No, I want to hear, Emily said. Mika agreed. So it looked like Eli was going to crack. There's a legend, I guess you would call it. Have you ever heard the talk of the Jesuits around? He asked us. I mean, I've heard the name, but no specifics, I admitted. The girls agreed. They are a very, very wealthy family that was in business with Disney World in the early 80s. The daughter's name was Isabel Jeswood, he continued. Emily interjected. Oh, I have heard that name for sure, she exclaimed. Well, she was to be married right here in Disney to a man whose name honestly escapes me. However, the week before it was found out that he was a con artist. He never really loved her. He was already engaged to another woman, in fact. He was just in it for her money. My God, that is awful, Mika said while pouring another drink. When she found out, she was destroyed to the point of no return. Their favorite ride in the park was the Haunted Mansion. So towards the end of the night, she put on her wedding dress and got on the ride, after downing 2 bottles of antidepressants and a bottle of Jack. She was dead before the ride even ended. He finished and took a shot of Jameson. Shut the fuck up, Emily said. You're so full of shit. Yeah, man, I have to admit, you had me for a second. I admitted. Babe, I had no idea you were so creative. Mika kissed him. I wish I was joking, you'll see. Now that you know, you'll feel it, you'll hear it. She knows you know now. After that, we all kind of just moved on. It wasn't right away. Maybe 2 or 3 shifts later, I hear it. A slight cry, like a sob. I was working the exit of the ride alone, which isn't unusually for a Tuesday night on the off season. I checked the camera to make sure a kid didn't get out of their seat, which was rare but not unheard of. Nothing, not a single person. There hadn't been a person in the last half hour at least anyway. I walked along the path to the emergency exit just to make sure the cam wasn't missing anything, the whole time hearing the cry. Again, nothing. Suddenly I felt wrong, like the feeling you get when you know someone is watching you. That weight, the uncomfortable, almost indescribable feeling. I walked, embarrassingly, a lot faster than I would like to admit, back to my post and counted down the seconds until I could leave. This would happen sporadically, but nothing more than the cry and the feeling. I decided I would ask my friends about it. They too had been hearing it. Emily was the worst. She swore something had been following her. It got to the point where I would sleep over her place just so she could sleep in general. This horrifying event brought her and I closer and closer. She would wake up every morning at 3 sharp, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. I would calm her down and get her back to bed. This went on for a few months. I started having the same nightmares she was having. I dreamt about the ride and being paralyzed in the seat, not able to move at all. But the ride wasn't the funny, cute kids ride. It was a scene of pure horror and violence, a massacre, ending with a woman dead in the seat next to me. I was determined to find out what was going on. So one night on a day off, I called Eli. We were gonna go out to the bar. We sat in S booth and ordered our beers. Jesus, man, you look like shit, he said to me. I haven't been sleeping well, if I'm being honest, dude. That whole Jesswood story has Emily and I pretty shaken up. He frowned. Yeah, me too. I wasn't completely truthful with you. He grabbed his beer and took a sip, slamming it back on the table. I'm not sure if it was the sleep deprivation, the heat, the beers, or all of the above, but as soon as he said that, I had a flash of anger and pictured myself jumping across the table and wrapping my hands around his throat. Well, now's the chance, I guess. I passed her to you guys. He ordered us more beers and a round of shots. She was stalking me. I had just learned of her a few weeks ago. That's what she does. She stalks the person or people who have just learned about her. The drinks were delivered. He took his shot and slid mine to me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We took the shots. All you have to do is tell someone else the story and this will all go away. She will move on to whomever you tell it to. You son of a bitch, I grabbed his shirt and gave him a sold right hook across the table. He didn't even try and fight back. How could you do that to us? To Mika, your girlfriend. I threw him back into his seat. I was drunk. I didn't want any of this to happen. You guys made me tell you. He tried to justify his actions. I'm sorry, Joey, truly I am, but this is your issue now. It took all I had not to beat him into the ground, but I got up and went to tell Emily and Mika the whole story. When I did, they immediately believed me, so we decided we needed to tell someone and fast. Have you heard the story of Isabel Jesswood? You should really stay away from the haunted mansion. I work security at Disney World. Well, I mean, I did. I work in security at Disney World, the happiest place on earth. Typically, I wouldn't say where I work, as obviously there are some pretty strict rules about things employees can put online, but I just don't think I can tell this properly without that context. And honestly, I think this may be it for me anyway with this job. I just can't see myself working here any longer now. I've been with the company for 23 years. The first 20 years I worked in the parks, nabbing shoplifters and rounding up people who were drinking too much for the heat. Occasionally there'd be a fight to break up, but people usually kept it pretty mild. The heat and walking was getting too much for me the last few years, so I asked to be transferred somewhere with a /C, and the company moved me to one of their resorts. While the working conditions were 110% better as far as climate and comfort go, the guest issues were trickier, mainly domestics. I guess the expense and stress of vacation got to a lot of people, and I'd be called by neighboring rooms because some mom and dad were yelling at each other. I'd try to suggest they take a nap or go do separate activities for a bit, and that would usually calm them down. But none of that is what I'm here for. I've got to get this out while I have time. 3 days ago, I got a call from management. Apparently, a couple of days before that, housekeeping had gone into a room that should have been turned over that day. Turned over is when one guest leaves by about 11 a.m. and the next guest checks in around 3 p.m. and all of the guests' items were still in the room. Housekeeping made a note of it and moved on, but during the next 2 days when they entered the room, everything was still there and untouched. I went to check it out, and sure enough, there was an empty room full of luggage, clothes, snacks, some toys, everything a family would need for vacation. The manager had already looked up the previous reservation, and it was for a family: dad, mom, 2 little kids. I tried to call the phone numbers they had given, but all I got was voicemail. We were a bit stumped, so I made the call that housekeeping could clean the room and take the family's personal items to be held until we got in contact with someone. I went digging into the reservation more. The family had arrived 5 days before housekeeping discovered all of their stuff. I found that the family had paid a parking fee and their vehicle description was listed. A quick walk of the parking lots and I had easily located their vehicle. So that ruled out a car accident or them deciding to just leave all their stuff behind. Next, I saw that they had bought a dining plan. This is when a guest prepays for all of their food. They're given a certain number of credits to use for meals. This family had only used 3 credits, and the last one was 2 days after they checked in. It appeared that the day they arrived, they got here late and probably just stayed at the resort. The next day, they used 2 credits at Epcot. The second park day, they used just 1 credit at Magic Kingdom, and it was at breakfast time. Now, at Disney, we have something called magic bands. Magic bands are worn by the guests and act as a room key, park ticket, credit card, dining reservation payment, fast pass, and more. It took some work, but I was finally able to look up this family's fast pass history. The day they went to Magic Kingdom, they had breakfast at a restaurant in the park, rode a couple of rides, and then rode their last ride, It's a Small World, around 11 a.m. Then nothing. Finally, it was time to bring in someone else on this. I called an old coworker at Magic Kingdom and asked him to pull security footage for It's a Small World at the time they wrote it, and I made my way over there. When I got there, my friend was very confused, almost distraught looking. He showed me what he found. There's usually a camera in the direction of where rides load and unload. The footage showed them scanning their bands to use fast passes for the ride and boarding the ride. The footage from the exit of the ride just showed the other people in their car exiting. They weren't there. Of course, we thought the worst. Maybe one of the kids had fallen out and mom and dad and the other kid got off in the middle of the ride to help and they all got injured or killed or stuck in machinery somewhere. So we shut down the ride, middle of the damn day, turned off that earworm music and turned up the lights. Me and my buddy walked that ride 3 times before we called in help. Eventually, there were close to 10 cast members searching, and we didn't find anything except for 3 cell phones and a hat. I was right stumped. I've kept digging the past couple of days, and I'm not sure who to tell what I found next to. I've called the police, and I suppose they're on the way, but the company has a way of covering up things like this, and I decided I can't live with myself if I don't put out some type of warning. I kept digging into their reservation over the last couple of days, and today I noticed they had purchased Memory Maker. There are photographers all over the parks and cameras in a lot of the rides, and with Memory Maker, the photos are all free. They automatically get added to a guest Disney account when the system knows their picture has been taken, and the system always knows, everyone's whereabouts are always known with the magic bands. Well, I opened up their Memory Maker photo album, and I swear there are 732 pictures. The first 30 or so are pretty normal, Epcot, a few rides in front of the castle, but the rest are all in It's a Small World. The rides only take 1 picture per go-around, so it appears as though this family has ridden this ride over 700 times. The first picture was pretty normal. Everyone looked happy. It was a busy day and a full car of guests. The next one is rough to look at. The car is empty except for this little family, and they look so darn confused. The next 10, 15, I can see Dad getting angry, yelling. Mom is holding on to those 2 kids like her life depends on it. And you can see the kids getting increasingly upset, crying. And it goes on and on and on. After 50 or so, it looks like they're trying to get out. In one, the dad is missing. In another, they're all gone. Maybe like they've bailed early in the ride and tried to walk out, but in the very next one, they're all right back in that damn car. After around 450 or so, I only see the mom and kids. It's just when I look closely, I can see Dad, maybe just his body now, slumped down in one of the other seats. Since about 675, there's just Mom and 1 kid, another body in another seat. The mom and kid aren't moving anymore. I think them 2 are still alive, just damn near catatonic, looking straight ahead, pale. And y'all, I swear on my life, the dolls are moving or something. In some of these pictures, I can tell they aren't where they should be. I even saw one with a doll in the car with his family. I can't look anymore, I'm gonna lose my lunch. I closed the album. Its file size has increased since I closed it. God, are there new pictures being added? I see on security cameras that the local PD just arrived, so they'll take over soon. I wish I knew what the hell is going on, but I also wish this damn thing had never landed in my lap. I don't think I'll be able to update this. After I talk to the police, I think I'm gonna walk out of here and never come back. I just wanted to get this out there before Disney feeds the media some cover-up as to why a whole family vanished. They didn't vanish, I know where they are. I've been working for Disney, and I've got some stories to tell. Did you know that there's a second hidden Disneyland beneath the real one? In the early years of the park, old Walt himself decided he didn't like characters traveling through themed areas where they didn't belong. He said it broke immersion, so he had an entire complex built beneath the Magic Kingdom. It mirrored every street, every ride, every land above it. The arrangement was designed to enable masked men to sneak around so well that your children never noticed, leaving you happy to foot the bill. Disney works very hard to keep its secrets. Here's another fun fact. Every cast member has to be on stage whenever they're in potential sight of park guests, even the janitors. That's where I come in. For the past 20 years, I've been cleaning up every type of mess that park visitors have the ability to make. If you come off of the teacups and paint the ground with the clam chowder you just ate at Royal Street Veranda, I'll be there. It's my job to whisk away the spunk with the precision of a diligent surgeon. It's a lot easier than you'd think, given the fact that we've been watching you from the very moment your tumbly got rumbly. There are cameras on you from the moment you're shepherded into a parking spot in the morning until the tram drops you off after the fireworks at night. Things are fine if you know your place. I learned that pretty quickly. The first lesson sticks out in my mind. I'd been on the job 1 year, 7 months, and 13 days when a distraught-looking couple came to me and asked where they should go to inquire about a missing child. I was in the zone immediately, leading them straight to the office on Main Street while explaining how park employees would have their daughter escorted through the underground passages directly into their waiting arms. Upon arriving at the office, I opened the door, turned around, let them inside, then turned back. They were gone. I was searching furiously for them when the head of security emerged, looking grim. I had gotten maybe 3 words out when he cut me off. "Everything is fine, Sid. The parents have been reunited with their son." It was a daughter. That's right, their daughter. Why don't you take some time off? A week's paid vacation would give you enough time to visit Orlando. Did you know that park associates are entitled to complimentary park tickets and travel reimbursements? But it could be much longer than a week, Sid, he grumbled with a note of very grave finality. I took the plane tickets, but went to the beach instead. I did very well for myself in the ensuing years. I cleaned things up, and I didn't question why our electric meters would occasionally record 1,000 megawatt hours used between closing at night and opening the next morning. There was no reason to ask why a dozen staff members frequently spent the night furiously cooking food that none of the night staff ever ate. I never inquired about why there was a yellow door in the passageway under Adventureland, or why I got vertigo every time I drove by it, and no one ever questioned the firm policy of distraught families that had been separated. Get them out of sight. It breaks immersion. That reason was always good enough for me. But the strangest thing ever to happen was just a couple weeks ago. I was in the underground Disneyland, spending my break by trying to forget the poopy accident I'd had to fix in the Alice in Wonderland ride. A costumed Mickey Mouse came into the lounge, looked at me, then sat on the opposite couch with his legs crossed. I smiled, nodded, and tried to zone out, which is hard to do when a cartoon mouse is staring at you. And why was he still a mouse? The first thing that I do upon stepping off stage is to drop my smile, let out a fart, and ease into relaxation mode. Why wouldn't someone take the first opportunity to doff a ridiculous mouse head? I stared back. He didn't move. It wasn't pleasant. I wondered if he was stuck in the damn thing, and obsessively started looking for seams in the costume. But I couldn't find any. My blood dropped a few degrees while my stomach turned over like a beached whale as I realized there were no openings in the costume. I mean, what the hell? Was this guy sewed directly into the outfit? Was the illusion that good? Could my very dull imagination actually have conjured up the belief in magic? And why was he just staring at me? That's weird as shit, even without the fused cartoon mouse skin suit. There was no getting around the fact that this fucker was an odd duck who wore that fact like a badge of honor. Then it blinked. I don't mean the man inside the costume blinked. I mean those fucking giant mouse eyes rolled over to me, locked onto my face, and the anthropomorphic cartoon rodent blinked its goddamn eyes. We were alone in the room, and I was about ready to leave a bigger shit stain than that loose bald boy on the Alice ride. I opted, however, to turn and run into the hallway instead. I got a sudden burst of adrenaline-fueled energy when I heard rapid-fire footsteps behind me. I tried to outrun the thing, but my football glory days are a quarter century in the past, so that didn't work out very well. I think I made it about 300 yards before my burning lungs forced me to roll onto the ground and await my own untimely demise at the gloved hands of a mouse. But he didn't kill me. Through my blurred vision and desperate gasps, I was barely able to make out a very man-sized shape standing above. It was the head of security. He looked furious. Next to him was a man who looked vaguely familiar. He was tall, pale, and dressed in a gray suit with a fedora. He did not look like he'd been running at all. "Well, Sid, The head of security casually shouted, clearly less winded than I was. How about we send you to Europe for this vacation? I'm in Italy now. A few days ago, I started reading about other people who were coming out online about their Disney experiences. I stopped being able to accept the denial that I had worked so hard to maintain. I also noticed that a lot of other people on my tour had connections to Disney, despite the fact we had never met before and were not part of a Disney-sanctioned tour. It seemed that we'd been gathered together on purpose, but someone clearly didn't want us to know what that purpose might be. It was a very odd situation at best. So I did exactly what I'd been taught to do. I separated myself from the situation. That's the best way to keep things clean. I didn't show up for the day trip to Genoa. And in doing so, I stayed away from the bridge collapse a few days back that killed everyone else in my tour group. I'm the only one left to tell my story. And that story will end with me making it very, very clear that I won't be going back home. I think I'll be much safer living anonymously in Europe. Disneyland is hiding something big, and their greatest strength is making you believe the magic isn't real.